What if you could rob a bank from the other side of the world? No guns, no masks, no getaway car, just a keyboard. In 2013, a mysterious group of hackers known as Carbonac did exactly that, pulling off one of the biggest and most sophisticated heists in history. They didn't just knock over one bank, they slipped into the networks of over 100 financial institutions, siphoning off up to $1 billion without ever setting foot inside. This is the story of how a single email kicked off a global financial conspiracy. Subscribe to the Audit Files to follow the money into the next file. This wasn't your typical smash and grab. It was the dawn of a new era in cybercrime. For years, hackers had been focused on stealing customer data, credit card numbers they could flip on the dark web. But Carbonac had a much bolder idea. Why steal from the customers when you could steal from the banks themselves? To do this, they couldn't just kick down the digital front door. They had to become ghosts in the machine, learning the systems, watching the employees, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their methods were so patient, so advanced, they blurred the line between cybercrime and espionage. This multinational crew, with members from Russia, Ukraine, and across Europe, was about to launch a silent 2-year siege on the global financial system.
Every great heist has a starting point. For the billion-dollar Carbonac job, it wasn't a stick of dynamite on a vault door. It was an email, a very, very convincing email. This is a technique called spear phishing, and it is as personal as it gets. The Carbonac hackers did their homework, researching specific bank employees and their roles. Then, they'd send a message that looked like it came from a trusted colleague, complete with an urgent-looking attachment, a budget report, an internal memo, you name it. The whole thing was designed to feel normal, urgent, and get someone to click without thinking twice. Attached to the email was what looked like a harmless Microsoft Word document. But hidden inside was a piece of malicious code, a digital skeleton key. The hackers were exploiting a known vulnerability in older versions of Microsoft Office, a digital window that many banks unfortunately hadn't bolted shut. The second an employee opened that file, the trap was sprung. The hidden code would silently execute, reach out to a server controlled by the hackers, and download the real weapon, a backdoor program based on a nasty bit of malware called Carburp. And that is how the group got its name. Carburp plus bank equals Carbonac. With that, the hackers had their first foothold inside the bank's network. A single click was all it took. From a computer thousands of miles away, the criminals were in. The perimeter was breached. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. But for Carbonac, breaking in was just the first step. The real work, the patient, methodical surveillance that made this heist legendary, was just getting started. Once they were in, most hackers would have made a mad dash for the cash. Not Carbonac. They were patient. They knew that to really rob a bank, you had to think like a banker. So they settled in for the long haul, becoming what you could only call digital shadow employees. Their first goal was to spread out from that initial infected computer, a process called lateral movement. They were hunting for the bank's nerve center, the computers of the system administrators. These were the people with the keys to the entire digital kingdom, with access to everything from money transfer systems to the ATM network. To get there, the hackers didn't just use hacking tools. They used the bank's own systems against itself. They began a phase of intense covert surveillance. Using their backdoor, they installed keyloggers to secretly record every password, account number, and private message typed by an employee. Then, they did something even more audacious. They activated the webcams on employee computers and started recording their screens. For weeks, sometimes months, the hackers just watched. They were literally looking over the shoulders of bank staff, studying every click and every transaction. They learned the bank's internal procedures, the protocols for transferring money, and exactly how an administrator would authorize a wire transfer or manage an ATM. The video might have been grainy, but paired with the keystroke data, it gave them a perfect blueprint of the bank's operations. This surveillance phase could take 2 to 4 months for each bank. They were meticulous. They learned the daily rhythms, the names, the flow of money. They knew who had the authority to do what, And more importantly, they knew how to mimic their actions perfectly. By the time they were ready to move, their fraudulent transactions would look completely identical to legitimate business. They weren't just hackers anymore. They were virtual insiders ready to pull off one of history's most elaborate heists. After months of silent observation, it was payday, armed with a flawless understanding of each bank's systems. Carbanak didn't have just one way to steal money. They had a whole portfolio of cash-out techniques, each one tailored to the bank they were in. Their most cinematic method was what is known as ATM jackpotting. A hacker, sitting at a keyboard miles away, would send a command to a specific ATM. At a set time, the machine would just start spitting out cash. No card, no PIN, just a river of bills. Waiting nearby, a money mule would collect the bundles of cash and vanish long before anyone at the bank knew what had happened. In one case, a single bank lost over $7.3 million this way. Its ATMs turned into personal piggy banks for the gang. For the really big scores, Carbanak went right to the heart of the global financial system: wire transfers. Having already stolen administrator logins, the hackers could simply pose as bank employees and order millions of dollars to be moved from the bank's own accounts into shell accounts they controlled overseas, often in places like China or the United States. From the bank's end, the transfers looked totally legit. But perhaps their cleverest trick was manipulating account databases directly. A hacker would find an account with, say, a $1,000 balance. They'd quietly edit the database to change that balance to $10,000. Then, they'd transfer the extra $9,000 to one of their own accounts. The original customer would never notice a thing, because their $1,000 was still sitting right there. It was like printing money out of thin air. A theft that left almost no trace. Through it all, the group was incredibly disciplined. They had a strict rule: never take more than $10 million from any single bank at once. This was a brilliant move designed to keep the thefts just below the threshold that would trigger a massive mandatory investigation, letting them stay in the shadows for longer. By mixing and matching these methods, Carbanak ran a continuous global operation, hitting over 100 banks across 30 countries, from Russia and the USA to Germany and China. Hit the like button if you want to see more systemic failures exposed. For nearly 2 years, Carbanak operated like a ghost, its billion-dollar enterprise running like clockwork. But even the cleverest ghosts leave a trail. The discovery didn't happen all at once. It started with a series of bizarre, disconnected events that slowly painted a terrifying picture. The first thread was pulled in Kiev, Ukraine. A local bank noticed its ATMs were randomly spitting out cash with nobody around. Puzzled, they called in cybersecurity experts from Kaspersky Lab, assuming it was a weird local glitch. When the investigators arrived, they found malware, but they couldn't see any money stolen from customer accounts. The malware was targeting the bank's internal systems directly, something they'd rarely seen before. As Kaspersky dug deeper, they realized this was much bigger than a few haywire ATMs. They found the screen recordings, the keyloggers, the remote access tools. They saw the evidence of hackers patiently watching employees for months. It was clear this wasn't a smash and grab, it was a deep, persistent infiltration. Soon, similar reports started trickling in from other financial institutions. The investigation exploded into a global effort. Law enforcement agencies like Interpol and Europol joined forces with Kaspersky to connect the dots. They realized they weren't dealing with dozens of different hacking groups, but one highly organized criminal syndicate running the same playbook over and over again. The digital manhunt that followed was a nightmare. The hackers had laundered their billion-dollar haul through a dizzying web of cryptocurrencies and international transfers, making the money almost impossible to trace. But slowly, authorities started to close in. The hackers, for all their brilliance, made mistakes. They reused servers and left digital fingerprints in their code. In March 2018, the coordinated effort paid off. Spanish police, working with Europol and the FBI, arrested a man in Alicante, Spain, believed to be the mastermind behind Carbanak and a related group, Cobalt. It was a massive breakthrough, and other arrests followed, revealing a sophisticated network with ties to organized crime. While not every member was caught, taking down the group's alleged leader dealt a major blow to their operations. The 2018 arrests may have cut the head off the snake, but the ghost of Carbanak lived on. The group, often referred to as Fin7, didn't just vanish. It splintered and evolved, proving that while you can arrest a hacker, it is much harder to kill an idea. Their tactics became the blueprint for a new generation of financial cybercrime. Even before the big arrests, the group was constantly sharpening its tools. They started adding new social engineering tricks, like making phone calls to victims, to personally walk them through opening a malicious file. They even started using Google's own services to hide their command and control traffic in plain sight. After the arrests, the group's focus began to shift. While still hitting banks, they expanded their target list to include restaurant chains, casinos, and hotels, particularly in the US and Europe. Instead of complex ATM heists, these new campaigns were often focused on stealing millions of customer credit card numbers from sales terminals. Big names, like Chipotle Mexican Grill, Chili's, and Arby's were all hit. The Carbonac malware itself has also been repurposed, and is now used in ransomware attacks, showing just how adaptable these malicious tools are. The legacy of Carbonac is profound. It was a brutal wake-up call for the entire financial industry. Banks had to completely rethink their security, realizing that a strong firewall meant nothing if an attacker was already inside. They had to start assuming a breach was inevitable and focus on spotting weird internal behavior, like a system administrator in one country suddenly telling an ATM on another continent to spit out cash. The heist accelerated the adoption of advanced threat detection, and, just as importantly, a renewed focus on employee training. Carbonac proved that the biggest threat to a bank might not be a robber with a gun, but an employee who clicks on the wrong link.
The story of Carbonac is more than a high-tech heist. It's a landmark moment in the history of crime. It marks the shift from stealing customer data to stealing money directly from the source, turning the bank's own trusted systems against them. A multinational group of criminals ran a multi-year global campaign that netted them up to $1 billion, all without a single weapon or a single masked face. They did it with patience, sophistication, and a chillingly accurate understanding of human behavior. They proved that the world's most secure networks could be cracked open by one well-crafted email and a single moment of human error. Their attacks forced a fundamental change in how the financial world sees security, kicking off an era of assumed breach, where the question is no longer if an attacker will get in, but when. The global manhunt led to key arrests, but the threat is far from over. The tools and techniques Carbonac pioneered have been copied, adapted, and are still being used by cyber criminals today. The silent digital siege they perfected continues to evolve, a constant reminder that in our modern world, the biggest heists don't require a getaway car, just an internet connection. This is the Audit Files. Subscribe and follow the money.